Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on the latest NITSE-funded research, From Knowledge to Practice, Rethinking Streets for People on Bikes. I'm Michael Espinoza, filling in for Lisa Patterson, and I will be your moderator for today. I'm the event coordinator for TREC, the Transportation Research and Education Center at Portland State University. TREC leads the federally funded University Transportation Center, NITSE, the National Institute for Transportation and Communities. NITSE is one of 5 national centers across the U.S., and our research focus is on improving mobility for people and goods to build strong communities. This Portland State-led partnership includes the University of Oregon, Oregon Institute of Technology, University of Utah, University of Arizona, and University of Texas at Arlington. Our webinars are based on original research conducted by faculty, researchers, and students at these NITSE partner universities. Our goal for these webinars is to get useful research results into the hands of practitioners, academics, and other stakeholders like yourselves. Our speakers today are Mark Schlossberg from University of Oregon and Roger Lindgren from Oregon Institute of Technology. Mark Schlossberg is a professor of city and regional planning and co-director of the Sustainable Cities Initiative at the University of Oregon. He is a 2-time Fulbright scholar who focuses on sustainable transportation and ways to catalyze social change. This summer, he will be leading his 5th study abroad class on redesigning cities for people on bike. Roger Lindgren is a professor of civil engineering at the Oregon Institute of Technology. His research interests include traffic flow theory, intelligent transportation systems, microscopic simulation of urban and rural traffic, as well as pavement design and construction. Dr. Lindgren joined the faculty at Oregon Tech in 1999 and teaches both undergraduate and graduate courses in transportation engineering, as well as lower division courses in engineering fundamentals. Before diving into the webinar, I'd like to let you know about a few of our upcoming events. On March 8th, Chris Pangilinan from Uber will be speaking at our Friday Transportation Seminar. He will be discussing public transportation and new mobility. You can join us in person or watch online. Our next webinar will be on March 21st. It is a partner webinar with Fourth on e-bikes for everyone, electrifying communities in new ways. To see our full schedule of upcoming events, visit trek.pdx.edu/events. Before I hand it over to Roger and Mark, I'd like to give you a brief overview of this webinar. Roger and Mark will present for about 40 minutes. During this time, you can submit questions, which will be answered at the end of the webinar. We will be recording today's webinar and will make it available on our website. You will also receive the video recording and presentation slides in an email following the webinar in the next day or 2. If you are tracking professional development hours, this webinar is eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. Instructions on how to redeem the credit will also be included in your post-webinar email. During the presentation, you may submit questions for Roger and Mark by using the questions pane on your control panel. We will keep track of questions, and they will respond to them at the end of the webinar. If we run out of time, we will send out written responses for any questions left unanswered. With that, I will hand it over to Roger and Mark to talk about their research.
Great, thanks, Michael. Welcome, everyone. This is Mark Schlossberg, and Roger and I are going to be tag teaming a little bit here. I'll get going, then Roger will come in, and I'll wrap up, and we'll take questions and so forth. But really, we want to start in saying welcome, and we are really excited to be finally officially releasing this book, Rethinking Streets for Bikes. We kind of pre-released it at TRB in January, and now all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, and it's out there. We can all use it. So we're going to spend this hour going through what this book is about, giving an overview of the sections and its purpose and so forth. Maybe we'll get into a little bit of the details, but really we're trying to lay out what the purpose of this resource is and then have you go get it and use it and apply it in your own communities. So we wanted to first start off by expanding the team here that was part of everything. There's me in the upper left and Roger in the upper right, but we also had 2 other key people on this project. On the lower right is John Rao. He's a professor of architecture and urban design at the University of Oregon. And Dave Amos, who is wrapping up his PhD at UC Berkeley right now, was also a key part of the team, and he was part of a previous version of this book while he was a master's student at the University of Oregon, and he's remained involved with this and is now on the job market looking to be a professor somewhere. So this is our team, and it's been a really fantastic team because in this team is professors of planning, of architecture, and of civil engineering. And so it's a really nice mix of disciplines to bring to this project, which in its highest level is to help more cities do a better job of redesigning their streets so more people can use a bike more of the time. So this is a follow-up project of one that was completed in 2015, the original Rethinking Streets project. And what the 2015 version of Rethinking Streets did was it was really a look at like really normal looking streets that were redesigned with a complete streets type of framework. These were not necessarily award-winning type of projects, but the normal regular streets that all of our communities have, but presenting the information in a way of projects from around the country that were already completed. So not hypothetical redesigns, but projects that were already done and telling the story of these normal streets and normal communities, how they went about changing their streets to make it easier for people to walk or bike or use transit, and what happened. And throughout all the cases, and is very common throughout the country, the world didn't end. Things got better, more people were able to walk or bike or use transit, businesses tended to do better, vehicular crashes went down, etc. And so that was a really interesting project, and one where we were really explicit about the audience that we wanted to address, that we've now carried forward into this new project, which is we wanted to present information that was equally accessible to the traffic engineer, to the transportation planner, to the local elected official, to the consultant community, to urban designers, and also to the general public at large, to help make it easier for more people in the community to engage intelligently and appropriately in local transportation decision-making processes. We printed about 1,000 or 1,100 copies that were distributed, and another 5,000 or so copies have been downloaded around the world, and every day that continues to be downloaded. So that went really well, and there were some biking projects in there, but they were okay. And for those of us who do work in bicycle transportation, we know that just okay bicycle infrastructure in a lot of instances isn't really much better than no bicycle infrastructure at all. It might look good on paper, a line on a street might look okay in theory, but in terms of its actual use and its level of comfort for a diverse range of users, might not serve much of a purpose. So Rethinking Streets for Bikes came about, and our goal here was not to look at normal, average, just okay projects, but to find excellent examples of street retrofits for people on bike from across the US and a couple of examples in Canada, like really excellent examples of a range of different types of retrofit projects, but using the same type of approach that we did in 2015, which is present finished projects, not hypothetical ones, and communicate the information in a way that a broad variety of community stakeholders could use to help make changes in their own communities. So that's what we're gonna go through. So our purpose here is to show evidence that the world won't end when you build a great bike system. Might not sound like such a radical thing to say, but for those of us who do work in this area, it's amazing how threatening it seems building better bicycle infrastructure seems to be to many people. When in fact, it's actually the opposite. Not only the world doesn't end, but many things tend to improve. The local economy tends to do better. It's better for issues of equity and access and mobility. It's better for the environment. Happiness increases. So there's all kinds of reasons why we might want to do this. Public health. I mean, there's all kinds of things that many on this call probably know. But what we also wanted to do was really lower the risk for communities everywhere to do these types of projects. It's really hard for a lot of communities to take risk. A lot of our local communities are risk averse, And being able to see a community like them that has successfully done a different type of bike project lowers their risk for doing a project themselves. They don't have to be the first one. They don't have to be the innovator. They can just turn their elected officials or their community members and show them a different community that's done something similar in a similar situation and have some confidence about what might come up. We especially wanted to empower the non-engineers, so slight apologies to the engineers on the call right now. For a lot of communities, there's a disproportionate amount of power that happens around these types of decision-making in communities, and we wanted to elevate the ability of the non-engineers to speak about their transportation systems and decision-making processes on par and in collaboration with the local engineers. And then we also wanted to provide some opportunity for those local traffic engineers that really want to do more bicycle-oriented projects but are otherwise facing some local resistance. And we wanted to give them additional resource to empower their ability to do good work. So that's all the context for what we're doing. In the end, for those of us who really want cities to be redesigned for people on bike, it's not really a big mystery on how to do it. The barrier here is not really a design and engineering barrier, it's a political one. If we want more people to use a bike more of the time, we know how to do it. You build a system of connected, protected bikeways, make it easy and comfortable, and it works. I mean, this is what the research says. This is what experience from some of the greatest biking cities in the world show us. And we also know in this country in particular who we're trying to build our cities for when we're talking about bicycle transportation. Many people on the call here probably know about the different types of cyclists that Roger Geller first put out there, with this biggest group being labeled the interested but concerned people. People who are really open to riding a bike some of the time, but are concerned that the environment in their communities exceed their stress level. It's just too stressful for them, or maybe for allowing their 10 or 12-year-old child to go out by bike. And so that's who we're really targeting. How can we redesign our communities so that our kids can access our communities by bike independently and without fear, or at least without their parents fearing for their safety? So in this book, we have included a wide variety of examples and information that we hope will be useful. In terms of the profiles or the projects that we're profiling, there's a variety of types of bicycle infrastructure, from advisory bike lanes, which is relatively new in the US, so it's fun to be able to introduce that in a new way, cycle tracks, protected bike lanes, protected intersections, some raised facilities, some small investments. So sometimes just a small project opens up connectivity in good ways. So we wanted to highlight a couple of those. And we have a couple highlights on some off-street paths. Clearly there's a lot of examples we could draw from, and we reduced these down to 25 core examples that we thought give a good breadth and depth for each of these topics. And then there's also some more information included in the book that I'll get to in a moment. We drew from a wide range of cities, and we wanted to do that purposefully so that, you know, this isn't just the Portlands and Minneapolises that we're drawing from, but we're drawing from a wide range of small, medium, and large size communities, from urban centers to rural to suburban environments, and from all across the country, from a variety of political contexts, plus a couple in Canada, a few in Canada. And so this is just showing that diversity. So most of the examples that are shown come in a 4-page spread. So what you're seeing right now is a 4-page spread. So if you were to imagine the book opened, each of those horizontal pages that you see there are really two different pages. And I'll walk through what each of these subsections are and orient you to them. But if you have the actual book laid out in front of you, this is what it would look like. So there's a few things. So every example, probably most importantly, has this before and after. So in the lower left is a before condition, and then the main picture up top is the after, which immediately gives all of us the ability to see, you know, what did that thing look like when it started versus what does it look like now. And just looking at the before and after can tell you a lot about the condition. In particular, looking at streets that look like the streets that exist in your community, in my community, and think like, I wonder what could be done with that. And then to be able to see the after image really starts communicating a lot. Of course, we give a little bit of demographic information about the location and the metropolitan population size. And then on that first page, just a really brief overview. What was the project? What type of infrastructure? What was the project about? Just a really quick way to communicate that information. This is helpful for everyone to get a basic context. For policymakers, this is quick bullet points to get information communicated quickly. The second page has probably the most important piece here that we think, or maybe that I think as a planner, is the before and after street cross section. From building to building of the right of way. How is this space allocated in this public realm? How was it allocated in the before condition, and then how was that reallocated in the after condition, including lane widths, etc. Again, another way to analyze that street right of way before and after. There's some key facts and figures about the type of street, speed limit, ADT, the length of the particular project that we have that we're focusing on, and then some of the key outcomes. Again, in really quick, almost bullet form, the evidence of change. The third page will always have a context map, and these are at different scales depending on the project that we're featuring. The main project will be in this thick orange line, and then any connected bike infrastructure that exists will be in green and highlighted in ways that are either robust, so a thick green might be more of a cycle track, or a regular bike lane might be in that dotted form, which is, it exists but isn't quite at the same high quality level as what we're featuring. And then there's some additional context that we're providing. What was happening in that environment? What is that environment like? And then the last page typically includes some images and some additional ways to understand the context of the location and its use. So that's how the cases look. In addition to the cases, and we'll go through a few of the cases in a moment, Roger will lead us through that. In addition to some of the cases, we've also included some different information that is, again, designed to bring more people who are not living day-to-day in the transportation world in our communities up to speed about some of the ways to think about transportation decision-making. And so we have a few different sections. We have a section on changing the framing of our streets, and what you're seeing here is just one of several pages that discusses some of the key ways that transportation decision-making has been made primarily for the last 70 years, and some new ways to think about how we might think about our streets. So for example, planning for peak level of automobile use versus planning for the off-peak times during the week. Which is the better way, or what are different ways that we might think about allocating space on our street? Or do we plan for the commute trip versus the majority of trips that we take, which happen to be non-commute trips? So some really interesting ways to think about our streets and some descriptions about what they mean. We include a section here about myths about cycling. These come from anyone who's out there on a bike or engages in conversations with people about bicycle transportation, probably hear lots of complaints, and they tend to be myths. So we have a section here all with references around some of the myths, like cyclists don't pay their fair share for the roadway, or the safest thing that you can do on a bike is to wear a helmet, and etc. So this is one of a few pages. I think we have 10 myths included. So again, additional information to bring a wide variety of people up to speed on some of these issues. We've included a little bit around the changing mobility landscape. We started this project about 18 months ago, and wow, things have changed a lot in the last 18 months. So the rise of autonomous vehicles, their development and deployment and expected deployment, and the implications of autonomous vehicles on parking, on street right-of-way, on individual car ownership. So many changes going on there. And then, of course, in the last 18 months, the quick rise and deployment of e-scooters in particular has really changed the mobility landscape in significant ways, or sort of indicates that big changes might be in store. So there's a quick discussion about some of those changes that are happening here, which we feel really glad that we didn't finish the book like 6 months ago, because it would have been out of date by not including this information. So With that, I'm going to turn it over to Roger, and he's going to go through a variety of the examples. Again, not really in depth of any individual one, although maybe a little bit, but to give a diversity and wide array of the types of things that we're doing, or the case examples that we're profiling. So over to you, Roger.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. And as Mark has said, we had a multidisciplinary group working on this. And as the engineer in the group, I just wanted to mention how great it was to get the perspective of architects, planners, engineers, and of course, the wonderful students that we had working with us from those disciplines as well. So if you go to the next slide, Mark, kind of start into one of the what I found to be more interesting project types that we evaluated, and this is the advisory bike lane section. As Mark had indicated previously, our first page is meant to be very visual, allow you to look at an application both before and after picture. And you can see here that this is probably one of the lowest cost implementations that we look at, but I think can be very effective, and that's the advisory bike lane with the dashed lines indicating preferential but not a protected bike lane on each side. And as the upper picture shows, the vehicle is yielding the right-of-way to the bicycle and then is moving slightly into the opposite direction bike lane. So this is an example of how we're trying to present the information. By the way, we had over 100 projects nominated from around the country, and many of you that are on the call may have nominated projects in your town. And then we chose these 25 to get a broad diversity. And this is a suburban, almost ex-urban area here in Hanover. And we're able to show how effective a low-cost treatment like this can be. So if you go to the next slide, Mark, we move from the before and after pictures of the finished product to the very important cross-section information. Mark had indicated that this was his kind of favorite area, and I think those of you on the call will know that the right-of-way, we think of that as the public space and not just the space for the vehicles. And this is in the advisory bike lane, a great way of implementing a strategy where you have bicycle facilities being inserted without any additional right-of-way requirement. As we prepared the information, we were always looking at the barriers to implementation, successes after implementation, and you'll notice that on this page in the key outcomes section. There were safety analyses in this particular project, before and after studies, and on projects that had studies like that, we included those. The back of the book also has complete reference section so that you can find out even more details. In this case, how Hanover implemented this and how they are looking to do an increasing network of these advisory bike lanes throughout their community. So moving from advisory bike lanes to the next slide, Mark, we have an example of a two-way cycle track. This one is in Lincoln, Nebraska. So you'll just get a sense now. We've gone from Hanover, New Hampshire, Lincoln, Nebraska, a smaller community to a mid-sized community. If you look at the before picture there, I think that's an urban setting that many people will recognize, a wide downtown street that perhaps was over-designed with its width. And what they were able to do here is put in a very nice protected bike lane facility. You'll notice that it's protected by planters, and on certain sections it has planters as well as parking as the buffer. As we move to the next slide, we see how this road diet example took this very wide right-of-way street, was able to put in the planter, make the two-way cycle track, and this is a much more comfortable facility in the after condition. As Mark had said previously, a lot of the work that we focused on this project was facilities that would help those riders that want to use their bike more often but are quite uncomfortable about riding immediately next to traffic. And there's obvious safety benefits involved, comfort level, and lowering the the cyclist stress level as they go through here. On the key outcomes section, this particular location had some before and after studies, and while each of the projects was nominated by their local agencies, different levels of data collection was done. What we've tried to do is summarize the data collection, summarize the key results, and then provide you, the readers, with opportunities through the reference section to dig into the weeds, get into some details on how, in this case, City of Lincoln, performed their studies, what their full results were. As we move to the next slide, Mark, we get to the second page of the spread, and this one was very important. What I learned on this project, I had been an avid bicycle commuter for many years, and I guess lost the context sometimes in my bicycle commute where I just knew my pathway, but how important it is to have an interconnected bicycle facility system. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't looking at projects like N Street here in isolation. So we have a key map, and this is indicative of each of the key maps in the book, connecting to other quality bike facilities, be they other protected bike lanes, dedicated bicycle paths, off-street paths, etc. So the context page we think was really important. Although every city and town will have unique contexts, we're hoping that by showing a variety of implementation strategies, that you will find some examples that might be close to the streets that you're trying to retrofit in your community. And then moving to the last page of the spread, picture is worth 1,000 words. And so what we try to do here is give even more context, again, in a highly visual way. This is meant to be quite literally the coffee book or coffee table type book, where you flip it open, you look at examples that are of interest to you, that look like they would be similar to what your city is wanting to implement. And by providing you some pictures here, we allow you to see how, for instance, the City of Lincoln implemented their bike facility enhancement along with pedestrian safety measures. You'll see the bulb outs on the intersection on the lower left. You'll again see how bioswales and other stormwater management techniques were implemented at the same time. Roadway drainage is always an issue when you have large expanses of impervious pavements, and so we're trying to share information about how a bike retrofit project becomes part of a larger street retrofit. In fact, several of the projects that we profile here didn't start off as really bike projects. They started off as resurfacing projects or stormwater management projects into which bicycle facility design could be incorporated. So as we move from two-way cycle tracks to the next slide, we see protected intersection. This particular one is in Salt Lake City. And of course, protected intersections, while new to the US in the past few years, have been popular in Europe for quite some time. And when we think about our transportation network being a series of links and nodes, all too often we have, I think, in the past focused on the links, putting in first bike lanes and then perhaps protected bike lanes, other types of facilities, oftentimes in an urban area with a number of signalized intersections. In these cases where you have a protected bike lane coming into an intersection, the rider is faced with dealing with regular vehicle traffic, perhaps high-speed turning traffic. So the protected intersection is a way of continuing that level of protection for the rider, whether they're making a straight through path through the intersection. And I think the Salt Lake City example is very indicative of an intersection in urban America. Look at the before picture and you will just see a sea of asphalt. And while in the past, engineers may have said, oh, that's great, it's a sea of asphalt, what we've got is some no man's land in the center there. You'll notice that the after picture, we're really able to take that sea of asphalt, divide it up, let the vehicles know where their area is, let the pedestrians know where their area is. You'll see parallel crosswalks with the bicycle crossing. Allows for safe and effective left-hand turns, right-hand turns, and through movements for the bicycles. Again, very visual here with the before and after pictures. And then as we move to the next slide, Mark, what we've done for the protected intersections is given a plan view with some circulatory patterns, again, for the automobiles, for the bicyclists, as well as the pedestrians. And you'll notice a key design feature here. Mark said we wouldn't go too far into the weeds, but I do want to point out how important it is to have those right-hand turning vehicles moving more slowly through a protected intersection, putting them in a good position to yield the right-of-way to cyclists, particularly on right turns on red where those are permitted. And you'll notice in Salt Lake City here, they have made those curve radii quite small, which naturally decreases the speed for the right turning traffic. You'll also see in the key outcome area a description of the types of streets. In this case, it's two collectors, given some ADT levels, speed information for the connecting streets. Moving on to our next facility type, which is a raised facility. So here we are back into a smaller community in Jackson, Wyoming. And in this case, you'll see a bicycle facility that is provided at curb height, but completely separated from the pedestrian pathway. So it's important to realize here, we're not talking about just having a widened sidewalk. What we're doing is a raised facility. This one was done at a relatively low cost, leaving the existing curbing in place, taking a portion of the right-of-way, allocating it to pedestrian movement, and then to this raised bicycle path. You can see in the before picture what it looked like, where you had the street immediately adjacent to the sidewalk. So there's really two key features here, I believe, in my mind, thinking of it in the terms of the user. We're separating that bicycle facility from both the vehicle traffic, but also from the pedestrian traffic, giving a safe mode for each. Next slide here, Mark, will show you again how the cross-section has been adjusted. Again, no widening of the right-of-way was required. It was really a repurposing of space, and in particular, taking some green space on this left-hand side and allocating that to the raised bike lane. On the right side of the picture, there was an existing sidewalk that has now been moved away from the vehicle traffic, which itself is a safety feature, and then providing the bicycle lanes. Moving to our next type of example, and you'll just see there's more and more of these. We have 25 projects in total. We have several in the advisory bike lanes, protected bike lanes, the two-way cycle tracks, raised facilities, a great variety. And then we found some additional areas that we wanted to share with you. Some of these could be either really low cost or very short but key elements to bicycle facilities. So we call that our small investment section. In this case, it's one in Portland, Oregon. And then we have a small number of off-street pathways that again were important in the context of an interconnected bike facility in those locations. In addition to profiling all these wonderful projects, if we can move to the next slide, Mark, we also wanted to celebrate those of you that are out there right now working for city and state agencies, for consulting firms that are making a difference, and we call that our change makers. So we have 5 change maker profiles in the book. We want to celebrate you, and really this book could be also thought of as celebrating successful projects, and in that way celebrating the work of these change makers. So Courtney Geary is an example of someone that's very excited about the work that she's doing in Tennessee. And I believe that it's important for us as engineers and planners to have role models, to see people making changes. It doesn't matter whether you're in a small town or working in a very large agency. how one individual or a small group of individuals can have a big impact on new projects in their location.
So this is Mark. I'll jump in here and just say I'm particularly, it's really been really nice to be able to include some profiles of some of these change makers. The profiles are longer than what you're seeing here, but they're personal, they're interview type formats to get some real personality of what makes people tick and what are their challenges and what keeps them going. In the example of Courtney here, it's a little extra special for me. She was actually a graduate student of mine, and the first time I led my study abroad class to the Netherlands was in part inspired because she was a student in the program, and I thought it would be great for her and for me to go learn and figure out how things were happening over there. And so it's very gratifying to see a former student doing such amazing work in her community. She also happened to be a previous NITSE Student of the Year, so there's all kinds of nice continuity happening here, from student to excellent student to now doing excellent work in her own community. So that's a little extra professor mentoring pride shout out for Courtney. So so clearly that was a really cursory overview of some of the examples, and our purpose here was not to really go into depth in any one example, but to give you an exposure to the types of projects that we're featuring, the breadth of projects that we're featuring, and give you a sense of the way that we're communicating the information, and hopefully give you an excited sense that there's not only really good information here, but that the information is really accessible to a wide range of stakeholders, whether they're professional people in the transportation realm, formal decision makers, general community members, or kind of the lay decision makers that all of our communities have that influence whether things get done or not, or how they get done, and so forth. The book is free to download, so go download it. Actually, both books are available for free to download. The easiest way to find them is to go to rethinkingstreets.com. For the Rethinking Streets for Bike, there'll be a link from there over to the NITSE site for you to actually download the book. It's just the URL is a little easier to remember, rethinkingstreets.com. And the more the merrier. This is a taxpayer-funded resource, and we hope that as many people find it of use as possible. So it's free to download. We are printing probably a couple hundred books, and we'll be distributing them to each DOT director and each bike ped coordinator within each state DOT. Of course, we'll be sending some print copies to each of our cities that are profiled here, and then to some of the students that have done work on the project. And then depending on what's left, we'll distribute a few around to some of the national professional associations, and then we'll see what's left from there. My guess is that will take care of most of them. If we come across other funding to print and distribute more, we will be sure to make that publicly known so that we can take in requests for copies. We'll probably also make a print on demand version available as well, and there'll be some nominal cost that you'll pay that nothing will come to us, but that'll just, if you want a print copy, that'll be available. So anyway, rethinkingstreets.com. It's very easy to get either of these books, and really tell your colleagues or community members or your friends or your roommates or your spouses or your children or your parents and grandparents or whoever they might be, that if they're interested in these types of topics, this is a really nice way to get access to the material. And I'll say just kind of a funny story here in Eugene, where I live. These whole books actually came about because of a street retrofit project on the street where my dentist is located, and there was quite a bit of community controversy of retrofitting a street so that there was some bike and some pedestrian access from something that was really not friendly at all. And after talking with the dentist about why he should be supportive of the street redesign, giving him my insights or my perspectives, opinions about it, and he was quite receptive and understood. And I asked him if I could leave the first Rethinking Streets book just in the waiting room of the dentist. And it's actually been quite amazing how many people I've run into town that said, hey, I saw that book at the dentist. And so it's a type of resource that we're hoping that it can be that type of, have that type of accessibility to a general public, in addition to those of us who do this work professionally. So really feel free to share broadly. So one more set of thank yous. First to the extended team. So again, Roger and I are just two of the four main people. John Rao is architecture professor at Oregon, and Dave Amos, who is wrapping up his PhD at Berkeley right now. We're kind of the four kind of PI, principal investigator types on this, but we also had a broad team of students across multiple universities and disciplines working on the projects as well. They're all acknowledged in the book. And of course, a big thank you to NITSE for their support of this type of work, of finding and supporting ways to bring knowledge to practice and really get information into the hands of practitioners so that we can make all of our communities better. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michael for a little wrap-up information, and then we'll have some time to get to questions, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Roger and Mark. So we have some questions coming in online, and please feel free to continue to send those in. For the first question, Mark, if you could navigate back to the cross-section on the advisory bike lanes. There's a question that came in. If you could go over and explain how the right-of-way works and how cars negotiate when they pass each other. And then a follow-up from a different person is there experience with these advisory bike lanes in winter cities, and is visibility reduced when snow might be covering those markings?
Sure, I'll take a lead in here, and then Roger, feel free to jump in. Yeah, super interesting that those were the first questions. These are actually pretty common in the Netherlands and on high-speed, high-volume roads. So they're pretty amazing that they work, and they work based on the basic human desire not to crash into things, including other people. So the first part of the question was sort of how does this actually work? Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So
that's correct.
Yeah. So basically that middle lane. So if you think of this as three lanes, the bike lanes on the outside and the car lane in the middle. So the car lane in the middle is not quite wide enough for two vehicles to pass each other going in opposite directions. And so they are allowed to move into the bike lane if they were ever to pass. And in the examples shown here, right, the car is moving over just to give some more comfort to the person on bike coming in the opposite direction. They're most often used in locations, or they're commonly used in more rural locations in the Netherlands. At least that's where they started, where you don't have a big right-of-way, where you want to provide some bicycle access, but really where you don't have a large volume of people either driving or people biking. So if you look at this example and think, okay, well, what's the worst case sort of situation to have happen? So the worst case situation that would happen here would be there's people biking in both directions on the sides, and there's two cars kind of coming at each other, and they all converge miraculously in the same geographic location when everyone is aligned there. Right, that's the worst case scenario that we're thinking about. So first off, that scenario almost never happens. In fact, won't happen. And why won't it happen? It won't happen because either there's just not that much activity going on, but let's assume there's more activity going on. What will happen is, as the cars are approaching each other, they will be reading the cues of where people are on the bikes and where the gaps are and who can move over to which side and can work it out. Because no vehicle driving a vehicle is going to want to crash into someone else. And so that's kind of how it works. And like I said, in Utrecht in particular, as I take students there in the Netherlands, they've taken this model and really put it on much higher volume streets of both vehicles and cyclists, and with great success. And it's actually a model they're moving more and more streets toward, kind of adding some ambiguity and allowing that ambiguity actually to create safety where overregulation has often created more danger.
Mhm.
So the other part of the question was what happens in bad weather. I don't know a lot.
Yeah.
I can't answer that a ton, other than the weather in the Netherlands is not fantastic, and this is very common in urban and rural areas. So I'm sure it all depends on the local city's ability to like clean snow. If you're talking about snow, if you're talking about rain and visibility, it would be no different in a situation like this than any other situation.
And Mark, maybe I'll just jump in on the weather for a second, given that I'm the token Canadian on the project. So although my university's in Oregon, my hometown and heart are in Edmonton, Alberta. So one of our profile roadways for the advisory bike lane was actually up in Ottawa, which experiences significant winter snow. And although I did not conduct the research, evaluated the research that Ottawa had done, they had some reduced crashes afterwards, which is wonderful. They also found that there wasn't a big problem with snow. Obviously, in a major snow event, there's going to be a shorter period of time where lines are obscured, pavement markings, but that's going to be the case even in a traditional bike lane delineation. So there will be some short-term disruption in snow conditions, but you'll find that bicycle commuters in Edmonton and Calgary and Ottawa and other snowy areas do continue to ride through the winter months. And as long as the city, as Mark said, has a robust snow removal program, which most winter cities do, then the bicycle facilities can actually function quite well in all seasons.
Great, thank you for that information. So there's another question from Sky, and just as we tend to focus on links and a network rather than nodes, we tend to focus on projects rather than policies overall. Have you seen examples of cities promoting bicycle and pedestrian facilities in an effective way through land use policy or zoning that leads to increased bikeability beyond particular bicycle-specific projects or retrofits on streets?
Yeah, maybe strangely, as the engineer, I'll actually start with that one, and then Mark can chime in as well. So I live in a relatively small city in southern Oregon called Klamath Falls, and our city council recently approved a policy called Streets Are for All People, and it's a fairly simple policy that essentially just works on that title, and that is a recognition that people are driving cars, they are walking, they are riding their bikes, and they're doing that in the public right of way. And so at a very cursory level, having policies like that can then start to influence individual redesign projects. And that policy led to a lens through which projects are filtered. And in the case of Klamath Falls, 2 corridors that had the potential for more bicycle traffic. One was a protected bike lane, another was a series of traditional bike lanes were installed, but they followed through on that policy of the streets are for all people.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add in, as a transportation planner, I would say that the best transportation policy is actually a good land use policy. All of our transportation behavior doesn't derive so much from the street right of way, although it's important, but how we organize our land, right? We drive right now, or most trips in most cities in the US at least are by car, because the distances between where we start and where we end are far. And because through land use policy, we have mandated, government decreed that we provide parking both where we live and where we end up, and maybe where we shop. And so we've altered the land use such that it's fairly rational for most people who have access to a vehicle to use a vehicle. And of course that discriminates against a large swath of the population, either who are not legally allowed to drive because they're not 16, 17, or 18, or they're not able to drive for whatever reason, or they don't have the economic opportunity to own and operate a vehicle. And so actually the best way to have a good bicycle policy, a good pedestrian policy, a good a transit policy is to have a good land use system that brings where we start and where we end closer together. When you have that condition, then you can talk about how to design the street right of way in a way that feels safe and comfortable for a large majority of people. What's really interesting for bicycle transportation, and why we're really excited about this book, is bicycle transportation actually is a form of transport that can span some of those larger distances. So clearly, if we're talking about pedestrian and walking, right, things really need to be somewhat close together. If we're talking about building for transit, you need to have a decent amount of density plus the walking infrastructure at transit stops to make it work. For biking, it's actually a mode of transportation that can do fairly well in a more low dense, more suburbanized, more car-oriented type of environment, even if those environments are starting to retrofit and infill and become a little bit more dense. Especially as electric assist bikes are coming on, or e-scooters are popping up in cities. These are modes of transportation that make the 2 to 5 mile trip actually very comfortable and very easy. And for most trips that we take in our day-to-day lives, that's the type of trip that we're taking. So if you eliminate the commute to work, which might be more difficult or further, and just look at the majority of trips that we take, to go to the market, to go meet our friends, to go, grab a coffee or whatever it might be, bicycle transportation is actually an interesting way to span poor land use decisions. But to answer the question in short, we didn't include a review of policy in here, but there's definitely different cities that have interesting policies both on the land use side, but also looking at kind of a hierarchy of transportation focus for their cities, starting with walking at the top, and then bikes, and then transit, and then maybe other modes, and then maybe car sharing, and then at the very, 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 very bottom would be individually owner-occupied vehicles as the last form of transportation we ought to be really building for in our cities.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question is from Nicholas. Did you find any examples where the redesign resulted in higher daily automotive traffic as well as bicycle traffic? Or was it mostly that, as you mentioned in some of your examples, there was a reduction in vehicle trips?
I can jump in first. You're now requiring me to have everything that we put in the book at my instant memory without flipping through the book, so I'll be unable to do that. But I would say, typically there'd be two types of results for these types of projects, actually in both books, which would be either there'd be a reduction of ADT in some cases, and in some cases either that might have been on purpose, right? The street redesign was really designed to reduce vehicular throughput and increase the access for other modes. But a more typical outcome, since doing a policy or doing a street redesign to reduce car access is politically really difficult for a lot of communities, and a lot of decision makers don't want to go that route because they get yelled at a lot. So a more typical outcome would be that vehicular use actually remains fairly constant through the corridor, while at the same time the use of, in this case, bicycle use goes up. So the kind of the story there, the political story that's nice to be able to communicate to local leadership would be, look, like we're not doing anything that is decreasing anyone's quality of life if they're driving, so don't worry about that. But what we are actually doing is increasing the capacity for more people to use a bike more of the time. And the more that people in a community have the opportunity to experience what it's like to be comfortable on a bike to do part of their daily life, then the conversation can start happening in that community, where maybe more purposeful street redesigns to increase biking even more and reduce vehicular throughput, if that's a goal, can happen. But I don't know that there's any examples here where vehicular throughput would have gone up because the bike infrastructure got increased, but I'm not surprised if the ADT would have been relatively constant. Because to think about it, let me just add one more thing.
Mhm.
Most of our streets have been overbuilt. Like very rarely, if ever, does anyone ever do like a post-occupancy analysis of our streets. In architecture, when you build a building and you design rooms and you hope for the way people are going to use different rooms in the building, you might conduct a post-occupancy analysis. Are people using the space the way I designed it? For our streets, we don't do that. And if you look at almost any street in the country, they're way overbuilt, even for the vehicular use we have. And that's not even thinking about that most vehicles only have one human being in them, right? Most vehicles are transporting 4 or 5 empty seats in every vehicle. So not even thinking about that, but just looking at, are we building for the commute time, which might be 8 hours a week, or building for the 140 other hours a week where it's not the peak time? If we did some post-occupancy analysis of our streets, we might find, you know what, we've really overbuilt most of our streets so that we can reallocate some of that space for other uses and actually not negatively impact those who are still driving or needing to drive or wanting to drive.
Yes, thank you. And so we have time just for one more question, and it's related to our previous question, but considering transit on these routes and bus throughput, do you have any information or maybe an anecdote of how a street redesign might impact transit in that corridor? I know in one of the images there was what looked like a new bus stop that was set in between the right-of-way for cars and then the bus stop, and then it was the bikeway. And so do you know, like, were people perhaps more interested in using transit, or like was there any changes related to transit that resulted from the redesign of a street?
I can jump in as well, I guess. We didn't really focus on that piece of the puzzle here.
Mhm.
And of course, there's lots of integrated things that we're doing with our right-of-way. One of the nice things that does happen when you build protected bikeways in particular is it does either provide the opportunity or force the opportunity to rethink our bus stops as well. It doesn't really make any sense to have bus stops that cross over bike lanes to get to a curb. Like that conflict just doesn't make any sense. So it does
Mhm.
force the opportunity to think in ways to keep our protected bikeways really protected so that vehicles aren't crossing it unnecessarily, and to move that bus stop on the outside of the bike lane. It's not something that we paid a lot of attention to. There are resources to find and grab some of those examples to look at, but that wasn't something that we integrated into,
Yeah.
purposely integrated it here. But it's a great question, and really a good multimodal street. And a good street that's designed for people on bikes and people walking should also be designed for comfort for people on bus, of course.
Great. Thank you very much. And so this concludes our webinar. We'll just navigate to that last slide there. Mark, please. Thank you for joining us today, and thanks again to Roger and Mark for sharing all of their work. You can view other professional development offerings on our website at nitsy.trek.pdx.edu. Enjoy the rest of your day.